on Australia's business channel. This is Mediaweek.
Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, the editorial changes at the Herald Sun as News Limited continues its restructure. We speak with Damon Johnston about his new role editing the biggest selling daily paper in the country. We'll look at the latest commercial radio ad revenue numbers and find out about Foxtel's iPad and tablet app for its Olympic channels. All that coming up. But first, Southern Cross Austereo is fighting a decision by the communications regulator, the ACMA, to impose specific licence conditions on its top-rating Today FM station in Sydney. This follows Carl Sandilands' verbal attack on a female journalist last November. Now, the ACMA ruled the industry's code of practice on program content not offending standards of decency should be made a specific licence condition for Today FM, meaning it could lose its licence if it breaches the condition. Well, yesterday, Today FM was arguing that the conditions, if the conditions stand, it'll have to consider scrapping 4 live programs and could lose $15 million over 5 years. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our co-host, James Manning, the editor and publisher of Mediaweek, and the chairman of the ACMA, Chris Chapman. Great to see you both. Chris, if we could start with you on this case, do you stand by the ruling, given that Southern Cross Austereo seems to be saying that it's not workable, that if it loses, if these conditions stand, it could have to, not do 4 live programs and also could lose $15 million over 5 years?
Well, Bridie, it was in court yesterday and, as I understand it, again today. So I need to be obviously discreet and sensible about what I say. The ACMA obviously remains committed to the decision it took to impose a licence condition. It was for 24/7 for 5 years. We think that was appropriate in the circumstances. Now, the good thing about the system is that the ACMA decisions are reviewable, and it's being reviewed as we speak by the AAT, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and it's a house of review and goes to merit as well, not only errors of law but on merit. So that's a very important check in the system, and I think there'll be a stay on the licence condition granted to today. I think there'll be a stay. That's what the judges are indicating, and it may, by the time I've got here today, have changed. But I think there'll be a stay. But I don't think there'll be a stay with respect to the Carl and Jackie O program and one other program. So that's probably a sensible outcome in the interim, and then the judges will take it on advice, and they'll issue their judgment in due course. But look, the thing about it is that we imposed a licence condition that was really just the code provision. We lifted the code provision into a licence condition, so we lifted it from the co-regulatory to the direct regulation environment. So in theory, it's exactly the same due diligence and risk management that management should be going through. I think I've indicated to you guys before that it's not really about the talent, it's about our relationship with management. So that's where we're focusing our attention.
Given where this case has gone, though, does it give us some insight into your relationship with the broadcaster in this case? Whereas you do seem to do a lot of work behind the scenes and negotiate with people that you regulate. Did it sort of fall apart a bit here?
I wouldn't say it fell apart. Obviously, given the submissions made in court, and indeed the submissions made by the licensee to us in the first instance, because we have to propose a licence condition, then they get the chance to comment on that. And indeed, we did change the licence condition from the proposed licence condition to the final licence condition. Obviously, there's some heat around, which is what you're alluding to. But I think that's healthy in the system. I mean, it's the exception rather than the rule. And as an overarching generalisation, the ACMA would say to you that we're in the business first of communicating, secondly facilitating, and we do a lot of that, so we're very big on stakeholder facilitation, and thirdly, if all else fails, regulation. And we felt that that particular matter was so egregious that it required a licence condition. So in a sense, James, I think it proves the system.
I just want to ask you too, before we get through some of the other issues going on, about calls from, or moves certainly by the government and also the Greens to impose some kind of public interest test on media ownership. Media companies have been writing to the government urging this not to go ahead. What do you think of these latest proposals to regulate media owners?
Well, Again, being the chairman of a regulatory agency which needs to be seen to be independent, you'd understand why I can't address your question as specifically as you might like, and I think you'd appreciate that. It's fair to say that it's all happening in the business, isn't it? You know, you've got the Levinson inquiry, you've had the Finkelstein inquiry, you've had the Convergence Review report, you've got obviously tensions in Canberra around the Reinhardt, the Murdoch issues, the bid by for Foxtel, etc., or by Foxtel. So it's all happening. The ACMA already regulates the ownership and control rules, the diversity test, the 3, 4, 5 voices, the 2 out of 3 rule, and I think the ACMA has done it with great professionalism. So if there was a public interest test introduced by the government, if there was, and I make no comment on that, then I'm sure we would implement it as professionally as we do the others. Now, the government is due to respond to the Convergence Review, which no doubt will be a response, I think, to many facets in the media and the consolidation and the various dynamics that are going on. And all I can say is that the ACMA would continue to discharge very professionally the roles it's given, but I wouldn't want to comment specifically on the merits or otherwise. One thing you can say is that the public interest test introduced in England hasn't been very successful because it was very poorly crafted. So I think everyone's very conscious of that.
Just interesting quickly too that there's, despite the media sort of virtually 100% against any idea of a public interest test, there's a bit of public support. There was a poll in the Fairfax newspapers, it was pretty much split 50-50.
I'm not conscious of that, but that's interesting.
Yeah. Just quickly, a lot to get through. Wanted to also ask you about the local content figures by Australian TV broadcasters, and shows that those quotas are being met.
Well, they are being met, and you know, they're being exceeded in a sense by a material margin, but they always have been as a generalisation. And I think as another generalisation, Australian television does it very well. Why there's strong interest in those figures at the moment is because, again, in the Convergence Review there were a lot of recommendations about the bigger picture, the way in which you might prosecute the preservation of Australian cultural identity in the media, whether it should be through the quota system, whether it should be direct subsidy, whether there should be content service enterprises, whether it should be on multi-channels, because at the moment it only counts on the main channel. And again, the government has got a lot to think about in terms of its policy responses. The matter I think you may be alluding to is that recently we highlighted, particularly in the 10 network, that there was a lot of New Zealand, more New Zealand matter creeping into their content quotas.
The New Zealand matter counts into the quota.
It does, James, you're right, under the Economic Trade Act, blah, 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 yeah. And we just comment on that. In fairness to 10, they would say that we produce Neighbours on one of the digital channels, and that doesn't count. So, again, we're just sticking to our knitting and doing our role, and we highlight it in that context.
The telcos this week, you've been doing a lot of media about the, what's it called, the Telecommunications Protection Code. Yeah. Lots of headlines about bill shock, stuff like that. Seems to be a big happy family, you, the telcos, but it took a little while to get to this point.
I'd like to think it's a big happy family. It's been about 2 years in the making, and the Telecommunications Consumer Protection Code is a massive leap forward for consumer protection and enhancement. One statistic you may find interesting is in our regulatory impact statement that we submitted to the government with respect to the approval for registration. We estimate that Australians are spending about $1.5 billion annually in suboptimal telco plans. That's a huge number. So to the extent that we assist consumers to make more informed decisions, better decisions, at all the touch points of the product, advertising, point of sale, you know, post-sale, then that's going to be a big bonus for Australian consumers.
Chris, obviously a lot going on there at the ACMA at the moment. It's been really great to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity again. Appreciate it.
Chris Chapman there, the chairman of the ACMA. Now, Telstra's Managing Director of Digital Media, Rick Ellis, made his first public comments this week, 6 months after starting in the role. For more on this, let's get James's view on what Rick Ellis had to say about media strategy going forward.
Yeah, a lot of speculation that Telstra might have been interested in a big media acquisition, perhaps, particularly Nine. He said, no, look, we haven't been looking at Nine. We're not really interested. We are interested in becoming more of a media company. They have to have a definite strategy. And he talked about, someone raised the question, how would he feel if Foxtel was selling broadband? And he said, look, we probably wouldn't have a problem with that. Maybe he was talking about the fact they sort of already do, I guess, if you can be a Foxtel customer through Telstra, and there's some sort of bundling options there, but I don't think it's not really marketed as such. I don't think that you seem like a real bargain.
There's been a lot of talk about that, hasn't there? That the need for Foxtel perhaps to have that triple play to be able to increase subscriber numbers past that sort of 30% penetration level. Would it? Do you think that?
Well, it'd have to be a pretty good offer, I think. I mean, there's some pretty good bargains around compared to what there used to be in broadband. Foxtel will have to come up with a pretty good deal and have to sell it so it was easy. At the moment, bundling through Telstra, it just seems a bit complicated. So yeah, it could be, but I don't think it'd be like the silver bullet, if you like, that would automatically boost penetration significantly.
Just wanted to get your thoughts too on a couple of new offerings from Foxtel launched in the past week or so. The London 2012 app for tablets and the iPad, and also, of course, to take on the internet TV competition as well with the Samsung
tie-up. Deal I've done with Samsung. Yeah, the tablet app, I think, for Android and the Apple iPad in the App Store this week. It's free to download, but you do need to be a Foxtel customer to activate it, and then you also have to have the sports package with Foxtel either purchased through Ozstar if you're an old Ozstar customer. The biggest sort of challenge, I guess, for customers could be their username and password, which you need to activate it. Have I got one? I'm not sure. And how do you find out? So it's all very well getting it all set up, but then you're going to need those passwords and usernames to get it all going. But it's a pretty good deal. Yeah, and the Samsung TV deal, yeah, the internet stream for a smart TV, so you can get Foxtel without the box, the box in your lounge. I think it's a package of 2 months free they're offering to sample it. Then you can, the base subscription is about $19. So it's a pretty low entry point to subscription TV. And
just quickly as well, Petra Buchanan saying she's going to be stepping down as the CEO of Astra.
Yep, heading off. Her contract's up in around September. She won't be renewing it, but she has agreed to stay on to sort of facilitate the transfer to a new chief executive, and she'll be here till probably March, April next year.
All right, let's turn now to the radio sector, and reports John Singleton's Macquarie Radio Network, which owns Sydney's 2GB, has approached Fairfax Media again about buying its radio business. Fairfax abandoned the sale last October after Macquarie reportedly couldn't get the finance at the time. James, just looking at this, what do you think? Could it happen this time? And any reports perhaps that Gina's backing it?
Gina Rinehart's been mentioned as someone who could back John Singleton. It seems that he would need some, significant extra finance. Would one of the shareholders in Fairfax fund someone else to buy something that Fairfax owns? Just seems a little bit weird, doesn't it? So I'm not sure if it'd happen. But yeah, and the analysts were saying this week there would be a good move if Fairfax could get the right sort of amount. 96 FM, one of the stations, now number one station in Perth. So it makes the radio offering just that little bit sweeter, I guess.
We also had some data out on commercial ad radio revenue. Let's just have a look at the numbers. It was a pretty flat result actually compared to the previous year in financial.
Yeah, and a lot of people seeing as well, it's almost a win for radio. They haven't given away a chunk of their revenue. Their share of the ad market, well, the ad market's been a bit flat overall, so they've probably held on to a lot of that. The only markets that were up year on year were Adelaide and Melbourne. Sydney was down the biggest mover, down 2 percentage points.
All right, James, thanks for that. Let's just check now on the media sector's performance on the share market this week. Here's Chris Weston from IG Markets.